if it is going to work in the future, if it's going to be successful. And if you talk some art interventions, it's actually, yes, this approach is working. When you first try something and then you can do something more substantial, and it gives this energy that allows this zone to be developed more powerfully. And this first step is very useful. Some French bureau received the Pulitzer bonus this year because they used the recycled materials. So I would like to know if it's possible to develop this culture of reusing recycled materials. I can share, I can start this discussion. We are only researching this issue, investigating, and we, together with the Architect Bureau Forma, that is working on the revitalization of the factory from Prilad. And we are also working with some other partners, and we are trying to have some researches, if it is possible to have reuse in the context of this factory from Prilad. But we don't have any exact answers in the moment, but there is some understanding that not also full-scale reuse is possible in Ukraine, but it requires some certification and some legal regulations. But we are having some researches in the city in this topic of circular economy, if these principles can be implemented for the reconstruction of some public spaces. And we understand that in some small towns, towns also do it, maybe not at that huge level, and they can renovate the roads.
But if it's not a historical site and it's still operable, very often this cobblestone is used elsewhere to equip another public space. This is probably done to save money or for some other purpose, but generally I believe it to be quite green, environment friendly. Yes, and that sounds very optimistic. Any other opinions? Well, I would actually like to support Anna, what she has said. I mean, those cultural interventions, they will not lead to much of a significant quality change, but still, it gives you some food for thought, puts things into perspective and helps you see things from a more responsible standpoint. And then besides the practical aspect, there's also what we call memory. I mean, in the general sense of the city, of the inhabitants, something that is associated with a particular site. And if we're talking about some production venues, most often all those large production sites were the core of the city, and the majority of the families would work there. Like every second family would have, or every other family would have someone working on the plant. So here, if we need to decide whether to take it down or to keep it and adjust it, then it's probably the second option. Yes, and I would also like to add about reuse of the facilities. I know that we've inherited a mechanism from the Soviet times when we're talking about those core facilities. There's usually some sort of a base, with lamps, with cobblestone, the storage, in other words. So when something is taken down and then disassembled, it is stored somewhere, and the municipality can then use that for future purposes. Yes, exactly. Like when we are renovating a cafe, for example, or part of the downtown area. By the way, you've mentioned the inheritance, and I just wanted to check with you whether you believe that these revitalizing projects can actually help bring together different social groups. I mean, accumulate this human experience and talent that they've had in the past in this particular space and then use it for some other projects to fulfill other ideas when we have those architectural or development initiatives, something where it could be used. Anna, could I be the first to answer? Sure. This is a good question, and probably the primary focus of MetaLab working with this heritage. Just like Maria said in the very beginning, all these revitalizing processes, unlike in Europe, they happen live. I mean, those production facilities are not even shut down yet completely, but there's always an initiative to renovate it, reuse it somehow from a developer or someone else when there's still people working there. And oftentimes, this is the job of their life. This is what they've been doing all their life. Just like it is happening with Promprilad and other plants and facilities. Promprilad is actually an operating plant. And when all those talks started about revitalizing it, a great space, a great part of it has already been reused. They've built something, some residential facilities and what have you. And then there was this little plot that was still left unappropriated. And then this group came calling themselves Warm City, I think, and started revitalizing it. When we were starting out with MetaLab as an institution, the first thing we did was explore the context, the Promprilad and all those people working there. At that time, it was 150 staff members. They were manufacturing meters, and all they wanted to do was to continue doing that. So it is an important question, something that we have to think about and work on, but it is a complicated process. It is not so easy to integrate all those people into a new function. And this idea of the workshop, I mean, it's a format that we find to be resembling the history of the plant, what it's traditionally been doing. So probably it could bridge this former production facilities and the new site and the new team who want to work there. So currently, and I believe it was greatly thanks to the effort of the municipality who said, go ahead, revitalize it, but keep this production side as a unit. I mean, and the team of Promprilad had to cooperate not just with the revitalizing project, but with the production itself. And they're being relocated to different premises and adjusting their processes, working on optimization and manufacturing those meters and some other products. So we're hoping that what we have started will result in new partnerships, in new connections, and we'll keep this going. So it is an important question, I agree, and I know that there's another plant, Elektrovymerovich in Zhytomyr, that is in a similar situation, and they're trying to revitalize the facilities while keeping the production, to rearrange it somehow, to keep it going, I mean, as a new project. But there's no final cases, something that's been finalized in Ukraine, not yet. And I would agree with Anna. What we came to realize is that a successful case of revitalizing some production facilities can happen within a mature community, and its foundation will be the culture and arts. This is how it should be. I just realized that the projects we're talking about are mostly located in cities with a mature and powerful production facilities infrastructure. So it might not be as critical for them, but rather it is about the environmental impact. Because whenever we pull impact is their first priority. So probably it's not so much about the cultural heritage, because those facilities, they're not being shut down, they keep going, and they provide for the town and for the country. This is not the level we've been at yet. Yes, and then from Prilep and Hama plants, they are not big pollutants, in fact. And the production, the scope of production has decreased greatly. But when we're talking about revitalizing, we're not saying that everything should be taken down and then put back from scratch. New people, new ideas. We are respectful to the team working at the site, to its history, and we're trying to keep it and maybe just give it some new meaning. You actually made me think of this other project about improving the territory, the area of an industrial facility. And they do have their own culture. And this is what we're working to develop, to improve it, if you will. Usually, here we're not talking about this wealthy population group. Alcohol abuse is oftentimes an issue, so we're trying to change their lifestyle as well. Well, this is a very interesting insight and comment. I can actually think back about some examples too from the EU, for instance, when we're talking about the creative hubs set up in after those revitalizing projects are implemented, and they also drive the change further. But skeptics say that this only deepens the social inequality. And if initially those projects are rather friendly towards the surrounding community, ultimately it all comes down to an exclusive space as opposed to being an inclusive one. Any thoughts on that? Maybe some practices that could help us manage this in a less aggressive way, something that is inevitable. I mean, to make the space more inclusive. So any ideas or thoughts? Do you agree with that statement in general? Well, I agree, of course, that this can be the case. And in Ukraine, though it is a bit different, the process altogether, I mean, different from what they have in the West. There's aspects to consider. I mean, the cooperation with the municipality and the oversight that it exercises over the development of the city and the town. Here we do things in a bit different way, right? So I've been studying this for a while, this phenomenon. Promprilat, for example, if there are ways to work around it. Because Promprilat is like a magnet that obviously drives this gentrification. So we're looking into ways to manage it better so that the entire community would benefit from it. The reality is, and we understand it, that we need to respect the context and we need to work with the municipality. Because in an ideal world, they would control some of the processes, I don't know, regulate real estate pricing, for example. But oftentimes the municipality just does not have the capacity to do that. And so in our projects and whatever we do regarding Promprilat, we're trying to initiate as much research as we can together with the municipality. Like parking, for example, and transportation, the issue that we're working on at the moment. Transportation is quite critical for the city because we realize that the number of vehicles in Ivano-Frankivsk also depends on Promprilat, and this could be a source of conflict with the inhabitants, conflict of interest. So it's what we should think about, and we're trying to initiate research, like I said, in order to promote new policies such as parking and use of vehicles, use of cars in general, maybe introduce some new practices such as car sharing, for example, or bike sharing. This is something we can do, something that we can try out to manage the transport infrastructure better. And I would say that it's an open question. The impact, the ultimate impact of Promprilat, we could look at, there's still a lot of uncertainty. So like I said, we need to be respectful of the context and we need to interact with the community and help them find workplaces at Promprilat to integrate better. And Promprilat needs to be willing to cooperate with the community and facilitate its improvement. And I believe that this process can be mitigated. Thank you, Anna. Yevhen, maybe you have any thoughts? Well, it was an interesting term, you know, aggressive gentrification that you used. I believe that it is rather something unnatural, but rather a political and social process. And to make it less aggressive, I think that at that initial stage, when we start out with the project, we should think about the benefit for the community, for the people, and of course about the improvement of the city area in general. In order for that gentrification processes to not just be mere driving out of the people and the processes. Yes, absolutely, I agree with my colleagues. As architects and designers, we have social responsibility to the people, and this end consumer of the space is our main client, and we should keep this in mind when we work on projects like this one or on similar projects. Just take it as part of the specification. Yes, and I know that architects often act as agents on behalf of the community on the grassroots level. So they advocate for the needs of the people, and they moderate the processes between the developer and the community, the local residents. And they have the processes between the developer and the community, the local residents. And I have another question to our guests, maybe to our audience, if you guys have any questions, because we have time to take at least one question. Hello, my name is Olga Volkova. I represent the Center of Social Reintegration of People with Disabilities. We are an NGO, and we pay a lot of attention to the infrastructure and accessibility. As you know, we have now those new DVN standards that are mandatory and nonetheless often ignored at the stage of design and otherwise. And this universal design concept itself, I mean, it is so flexible and so vague at times. There's no clear definition, really. How do you manage this? Who would like to take this question? Any volunteers? I could be your volunteer. I know Olga, by the way. We're colleagues. And when we just started out on our first public space project, at this initial stage we were talking about inclusivity. But it was not our priority, but rather an impediment. And it wasn't until until the later stage when we realized that the project can actually benefit from it greatly. And so for the next project, we took it as a feature and as a competitive advantage. Oleksiy, Anna, would you like to add something? It's a great question, actually. When we're talking inclusivity, it was never the foundation for design. So at our office, when my team and I, when we sit down with this initiating group, the client, we always talk about inclusivity of this space as one of the basic conditions for the project to meet the needs of all groups of the population. I agree. We do respect all those inclusive norms and standards in our project, but given the way the spaces operated currently, just like Oleksiy said, it is not up to the standards yet. So Promprillad it's pilot. I mean, it's highly uninclusive, I would say. But we're looking forward to its further revitalizing to make it accessible for everyone. Thank you so much for your responses, for your answers, and for the questions, of course. I believe it is time for us to thank our speakers for this great conversation, for all those insights that you've shared. Yevhen, Anna, Oleksiy, thank you for joining us today, and a thank you to our audience. And at this, I'm passing the floor to Olena. Yes, thank you so much. Taking the opportunity, I would like to greet Anna on the opening of the umbrella space at Prom-Prilad. Anna, I hope you can hear me. And thank you so much, Maria and Yevhen and the audience. I can see that we have more and more people joining us, and that is great. And a shout out to our tech team for helping us deal with the technical difficulties. Before we proceed to the next session of our event, let me just kindly recommend you to follow the MetaLove page on Facebook, because there have been names bandied around. Interpreter's remark. No incoming sound. End of remark. Still no incoming sound. Still no incoming sound.
Добре. Я не знаю, чи вам цікаво спостерігати за цією картинкою. Мені цікаво спостерігати за вами і за тим, що відбувається.
I don't know if it is any fun for you to observe the picture. It is for me. So I hope you're okay. Osamu, we can see that your mic is on. Hello.
Yes, hello.
Супер, привіт. Ми дуже чекали виступу. Дуже перепрошуємо за те. Перепрошуємо за те, що
We've been waiting for your speech. I'm sorry we couldn't start on time, but we are happy to hear what you wanted to share with us now.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Osamu Okamura. Thank you for having me. I'm connecting to you from Prague. Just share with you maybe a short view from the window. I'm in the middle of the old town of Prague. You see a lot of car traffic everywhere and very little trees. Yeah, that's something what we will talk about a little bit today as well. So I've prepared a short presentation about inspirations, possible inspirations for Dnipro. So let me share my screen with you. And okay, so it's coming. Wait a minute. Yeah, so I think you should see my screen in this moment. Is it correct? So I'm very glad to reconnect again with Dnipro and with the Center for Contemporary Art and Architecture in Dnipro. And also, I was pretty excited from the discussion from the previous panel with Anna and Forma talking about Prompilad. I had a chance to visit Ivano-Frankivsk about 2 years ago, and we got a very nice tour of Prompilad. And of course, we also visited the Urban Space 100, the Urban Cafe. And we got very excited with my friends from Prague and also from the municipality of Prague. And we got a lot of inspiration there. So I'm excited to be back. And also in the year 2018, I had a chance to visit Dnipro. And also the team that is organizing this conference today took me through, at that time, a ruin of the house where you are holding your amazing conference today. So I'm quite excited to see that the space is getting alive and animated. And I'm also following, of course, your programs online whenever it's possible. So, but today, I want to reconnect also a little bit to the discussion we've held at the Dom Architekta in Dnipro in 2018, when I was presenting some pressing problems of our cities. As you can imagine, Prague is also part of this post-communist and let's say former Eastern and Central part of Europe. So we share some of the problems that are kind of overwhelming at some moments. So of course, there is this huge expansion of the industrial parks to the landscape and urban sprawl doing the same. We have some bad examples of social stratification and ghettoization, and also segregation of the rich and social differentiation. We have this overwhelming and excessive car culture. We are facing the aging population and so on. So these are the problems we discussed last time a lot. But today, we are also going to expand a little bit what we can do with that. On top of these very regionally specific problems I've mentioned before, we have also some very global problems that are omnipresent and in any city all over the world. We are facing the climatic crisis that are bringing floods to us and extreme heat to our cities. We are facing economical crisis, political instabilities, global pandemics such as the coronavirus recently or currently, terrorist attacks and so on. And we have to actually face all these challenges. So we can say the cities and the world today are not actually always the most comfortable place to be. But of course, we as architects and urban planners are trying to be optimistic and positive, and we are always trying to find some strategies and tactics how to face these challenges. So today, being back in the beautiful city of Dnipro, yeah, in this beautiful landscape on the riverside of the Dnipro River, yeah, I would very much wish to be there with you. But I want to connect to this story, to this, let's say, city that is very modern, that is was built in this kind of industrial boom time of the Soviet industrial boom time, and even before, built on the huge industry, on the business. Yeah, that's very vibrant city. So I would like to connect to the ideas of urban planning of the past and of today. When speaking about the uh, place where I was born in Tokyo. Yeah, we've discussed now in the discussions that there is some east and there is some west, but there is also a far east, far east. Yeah. So when speaking about Tokyo, everyone imagines the beautiful temples, you know, and maybe some skyscrapers. But this is the place where I was born. It's the Takashima Daira housing estate in a modernist city designed by most progressive urban planners in late 60s and early 70s for a new, modern, and ideal man freed from burdens of the past, of the history, with very new high hygienic standards, all the new norms for the new city. Ideal proportions, trees, sun, and a fresh air, an ideal city free of any problems and possible tensions. Ideally, but in reality, the Takashima Daira housing estate is one of the places in Japan with the highest suicide rates. When we moved to Prague, to Czech Republic with my family in mid 1970s, to one of the smaller new prefab housing estates, everything was kind of very familiar to me. In a modernist, unified, and spatially segregated city and the suburb of Prague, I immediately felt at home. In that time, about 1/3 of the population of Prague lived in prefab, newly built housing estates. Only my playground has changed from the stylized Mount Fuji you saw at the previous image from Tokyo to a wall built of many identical concrete sewer pipes. We were able to play with my friends here for hours. However, not everyone was happy in this normalized, beautiful new world. In November 1989, the lined concrete pipes were replaced by lined members of the communist police. And against them stood people who no longer wanted to be normal or normalized and wanted to live freely, to live democratically. This was at the very moment when I became intensely interested in architecture and began to study it. Criticism of modernism and modernist, unified, functionally segregated, and centralized cities and urban planning at the time in Eastern Europe with considerable delay had just culminated. I was also interested in new possibilities to deconstruct architecture or to conceptualize it only in my own mind, which my professor commented aptly in the words, "Osamu, you decided to study architecture and not to design a single house." I probably misunderstood it as a compliment, but after a few more attempts, my professor ran out of patience and with the words, "Osamu, don't solve your problems with architecture," he sent me to study conceptual arts. Good teachers always know where the young person is going. So at the conceptual art school, I finally started to focus intensively on architecture, but completely from the opposite end. I stopped thinking about buildings, but started thinking about people. The city is not bricks and houses. The city is people and the relationships between them. And empty and dysfunctional houses, like this beautiful, unfinished Baroque Jesuit college in the city of Yichin, which they locally name only as Russian barracks, only point to the unhealed scars in our society. Together with the local high school students, I started working on the restoration of broken relationships in between the people in the city, on something that might be called today social sculpture or creative placemaking. My professor at that time commented briefly on my efforts. Osamu, this is no art. Any better mayor could do that. And he was right again. Architecture, the city, society, and politics are a place of contest, of often completely conflicting private interests or views of the world, which are often not even possible to reconcile with each other, but exist in a shared space rather in parallel, side by side. This is the image from our parallel architecture school we founded with our friends. That is similar maybe to Connection School in Kiev and so on. I'm in good contact with as well, or the school Kuba Snopek is part of. He will speak about probably later. So we developed actually a parallel research on our cities that is dismantling the fake stories. And we were trying to dig the right ones or the true ones. We were also trying to develop new formats of interaction and sharing our knowledge in the city. This is the Karl von Drais Cycling University. You can imagine that Karl von Drais is the innovator of Dresden, or let's say also later the first bicycle. Because when we are speaking about our cities, it's also very important to experience them. However, there is nothing better than to be able to discuss the city in a cultured way. This is our Recite International Conference and Festival in Prague that was founded by American urban planner Martin Berry, and I was program director of for 5 years. The Japanese fascinate me with their highly cultivated behavior. And when the world's best contemporary woman architect, Kazuo Sejima, says, I imagine architecture as a big park for everyone, it almost sounds like a child said. I imagine architecture as a big park for everyone. It also sounds a bit Zen-like. Certainly, she doesn't mean by everyone a normalized individual, but a free person. I imagine architecture as a big park for everyone. But at the same time, fortunately, my Japanese father warned me that when a Japanese laughs, it means that he or she is the most angry. Because today's cities are full of growing conflicts and tensions, and current urban planning must deal with them in a refined combination of strategy and tactics, often with the use of tools that are used by the military in military operations. Today's city will certainly not be rescued by a handful of planners or architects. Today, in the face of growing problems with the unavailability of affordable housing or accessible housing, with the car traffic congestion, actually Anna also mentioned, the city's economy being threatened by the expansion to the landscape, and many others, the city can't do without the active involvement of all its inhabitants. Today, we are no longer talking about smart cities, but about smart citizens. That's why I also appreciate a lot the program of the House of Europe conference you are holding now. I saw you are holding many workshops like biohacking or synth maker by HackLab or Arduino or bioart animation, because it's really important to make your hands dirty, not just to talk about, but to experience hands-on approaches. Because if you don't understand your city and you don't experience it, you don't even own it. Today, more than ever, we are talking about the need to increase the livability and resilience of our cities. And the livability is becoming very often also the political issue in the political elections to the local parliaments. This is some of the examples that we are learning from. This is the Times Square in New York before and the Times Square after redesign by the Snohetta and Yangel architects that turned into the public realm full of pedestrians and thriving business. This is the image from Paris, the River Seine, the riverbank before, occupied just by the heavy traffic, and the city beach after complete redesign at the same spot. And this is the example from Prague. It's very difficult to see at the very first glimpse what has changed. But if you see all these lampposts that prevent people from using the sidewalk, and you see that it disappeared into the bushes after a very little design change, and it was also painted black, so it made it kind of invisible. So these are the little interventions that make the life in the cities so better. These are some examples of my, let's say I'm a member of a committee for urban development in Prague, and we are discussing with developers every single project in the Prague 7 districts. So these are some of the projects we already succeeded to bring to the, let's say, fruitful and better end, and that these projects make me so happy. It's a work of last 6 years of mine. And this is the hands-on planning I'm talking about. Because at the time, when in many cities, also in the developed world, there's this northern hemisphere, actually the dystopian visions of urban disintegration are becoming a reality. This is the city of Chicago, where we no longer speak about the segregation of rich and poor, white and people of color. Today in Chicago, there is a talk of hyper segregation. In a single weekend, the city has up to 74 people shot and 12 of them fatally. I've spent some time in Chicago 2 years ago researching on the programs, public programs of the Chicago Architecture Center that is being located in the ground floor of the building. You see exactly on this image, you see the big red spot and the C letter on the ground floor of the building designed by the Mies van der Rohe. That is actually quite terrible because you don't have any daylight in your office. So that was my great inspiration recently, because the Chicago Architecture Foundation running this center, they decided some 5 years ago that they want to become a national leader in youth engagement, in educating young people. That's something that opened for me a completely new dimension. They are running amazing workshops and amazing programs for the school kids, such as this hip hop architecture camp, where kids from the, let's say, African American communities analyze the hip hop texts at the places where they find rhymes in the texts. They create their structure of the urban plan, and they discuss the missing programs. They build this space out of the Lego bricks, and then they pick one of the missing programs, such as the community center, for example, and design it in so-called Tinkercad, that is a child version of AutoCAD, and they 3D print this little model and take it away from the workshop as a let's say kind of piece that is physical and that connects them to the city that they would wish to live in their own future. In the same time, they also compose their own hip-hop song, the song for the city and for its future. The headline of the song, written by the kids in the city of Chicago, goes as, "Build the hood up, put the guns down. I am talking right now. I am talking right now." This is the song written by these young architecture students, or potentially to be architecture students, not yet. The song that is dedicated to the victims of the violent crime in the city of Chicago. So the big question for me is how to make our cities more understandable, more accessible, and more just via better sharing to foster democracy. As we spend today more and more time in the digital and online world, the way how we perceive city today, how we experience it, and what we expect from it is also radically changing. Our theatrical performance, virtual ritual about the current city, about the intertwining of gaming and real worlds and related problems. It's possible to see offline, physically, at many international theater festivals today, and also online. But special morning performances are reserved for school kids only. Because a city that is losing its youngest generation is losing its future. This is also in the background of my last project I want to show to you. Last year, I wrote an illustrated book for children about the city and its planning. The book's name is City for Everyone. The book is now being also translated to English. You can see here the contents of the book. There are special chapters about the lack of participation, about brownfields, about monofunctional urban zones, about industrial parks, about shrinking cities, suburbanization, about privatization of the public realm, about gentrification, about unaffordability of housing, and so on and so on. At the very end of the book, you'll find also some pages about the good practice from the worldwide. I hope this book that is being now translated to English and should be presented at the Frankfurt International Book Fair in October this year could also be later translated to the Ukrainian language. These are some of the images of the models that were built by my friends for my book, Jiří and David, who are also fine artists, and that these illustrations that make this book so involving. It's also full of interesting data. So today, when being a new dean of the Faculty of Arts and Architecture of the Technical University of Liberec myself, people ask me, so Osamu, who is planning the city? And I tell them, it's not just urban planners, architects, politicians, and developers who are planning a city. Each of us is planning a city by how we behave and move in the city every day. It's you every morning when you decide how to go to the city, how you go to the city of Dnipro. Get in the car, and soon you will be suffocating in endless car traffic jams, along with lots of other people who will be mutually alienated. Go on foot, and soon you will wake up in a safe city where you will get easily to everywhere and to everyone. Thank you.
Ми також дякуємо з Дніпра.
Thank you so much, Osamu. I'm afraid we do not have any time left for the Q&A. Just a few quick announcements. Those of you who are the alumni of the House of Europe and registered for the picnic, it will happen as scheduled at 2:30. And then after the break, we will do this a little bit differently. For the English translation, you will either hear the original sound or grab a headset, and you then will be able to listen to the Ukrainian interpretation. And now I have a really quick question to my colleagues, and I apologize in advance regarding the way we should continue. Let me just quickly remind you of what is available because the break is going to start in a minute. So the restroom is here on the first floor, so is the bar where you can grab a snack. If you signed up for any workshops or individual consultations, they will happen on the second floor of the same building. Moving on, let me also remind you that from time to time, right here on stage, you will see the QR code. This is for you to evaluate this event honestly and sincerely. Just scan the code and send us in your evaluation. Just a second. Okay. So as far as I understand, Kuba has already connected. So we will have a real quick presentation at the end of this section, but this is an important one as well because it touches upon a very important issue. Kuba is an architect and an urbanist from Poland, and some of you guys might have met him already because he also coordinated the stage project in Dnipro. So he will tell us a little bit about how the town planning and development can change the perception of the city. So like I said, it will be a quick presentation without the Q&A, and then we will have our break. So, Kuba, are you with us? Yes, hello everyone. Let me know if you can hear me. Yes, we can hear you just fine. We can see you, we can hear you, so over to you. Thank you so much. I cannot see anyone, so wherever you are, hello. I'm happy to be with you, at least online. Unfortunately, I cannot be there in person due to the lockdown, but I hope that this will work and that I will be able to present real quick, present my project, Real Estate Art. But before I do so, I have a question. Let me know if you can see my screen. Can you see it? I'm trying to share. It should be a white page saying Real Estate Art. So we cannot see it yet. Well, maybe give it a second. Still no image. Hold on. Well, we're working to fix it, but if you could continue in the meantime as is. Just give me a second. I will give it another try because it is critical that you see my slides. Okay, great. So this is the kind of day we seem to be having. Okay, how about now? Yes, we can see it now. Okay, great, fantastic. So second time is the charm. So here's the deal. I know that we're talking about creative spaces and industrial spaces. So here's my first picture for you. I guess this is the most prominent example. This is the hunger space in LA. I think Google redesigned it. It used to be a hangar for the planes, and then they turned it into this office space, like a co-working area, and it also has additional functions. Quite remarkable, I should say. We've heard about spaces like this, but here's the element I'm particularly interested in. This sculpture is right in front of the space. I mean, very close to it, behind the garages. You could say it's not a big deal, but it is very symptomatic. This is something financed by the developer and the designers. I call it real estate art, something that is built in the proximity of the real estate in question. I mean, usually it is taken for granted, something like this, the elements that you come across, like from New York and from Berlin and from Dnipro even, because as far as I know, you also have a sculpture across the river on the other side, but it is also quite visible and part of your landscape. It is a very interesting phenomenon. Let us talk a little bit more about it. So this is the experience of California, and this is what I found out. There's a lot of money behind this. I mean, the developers, they invest a fortune into sculptures like this, even more than they do in culture. I mean, dozens of millions of dollars are poured in. And so it is very interesting. I was curious, where does the money go and how does this work? And here's what I found out. They sponsor this, I mean the developers, because there's this whole philosophy or the ideology of creative spaces and creative cities. And art is a big part of it. So this ideology is described in numerous books, has been in fact for 50 years. And it says that if you invest in creative industries, in arts, it helps your economy grow, and it gives you more workplaces, and everyone essentially becomes richer. This is how it looks in reality. I guess we could say it is part of the design process now, that when we as architects plan a public space from scratch or to renovate the site, here the anchor element here in this corner. And so this anchor usually has to do with arts. And this is how it is rendered. It's a dotted line. This is where it is going to be in reality. And what I also learned is that on the one hand, there is this promise that the investments into culture and arts will give us better economy, but in reality, something else is happening. On this slide, you can see some of the screenshots I took from the mass media. Basically, it says that the better the economy and the more money the city has, the arts actually tend to move out. It drives the art out because the city becomes more expensive. And we already spoke about the gentrification and displacement today. Another interesting example comes from Oakland, across the bay from San Francisco. It used to be a big plant, a big factory. Then it was moved elsewhere because it became obsolete. And the area itself was turned into a creative space. So this is where they make the art objects for the Burning Man now. I mean, they used to. And then they shut it down. And all those artists had to move. And this is what I found out. The more art objects we have, I mean, those real estate art, those sculptures built by developers, the fewer artists we actually have It is a paradox, but this is how things are. And I'm going to try to go deeper into that. So why does this happen? Oftentimes we have this percent for art law, and under this law, the developer has to invest a certain percentage into art at the very initial stage. So if you present it as a chart, this is what it could look like. And so the framework, this legislation framework, means that if the developer has to pay once at this initial phase, this virtually means that nothing else is going to happen. This is a one-time thing. This is something that is built once and it stays there. If we're saying that it should be a percentage of the budget, then it's gonna make a big difference in the amount. And I mean, this law exists in many cities. I know that in Warsaw, they are discussing it at the moment and how to work around it, because that actually impacts the investments and the funding on together, because we're talking about sculptures or murals and nothing else. This is what the landscape looks like. This is, again, San Francisco. And if you just know the number of people and sculptures, this is the city life and the result of the approach. The hanging piano that they couldn't put anywhere. I mean, it's a very nice sculpture, but it seems like it was just thrown out here in the back. Some stones in front of the building. It was designed by a good architect, but still quite conservative. This building is very expensive. It is an airport, and somehow they are chaotically transformed into some exhibitions. So anyway, what are the consequences of this format of investing into creative arts? When you want to build something, you need to realize that it is a complex process that you as the developer will have to go through, interacting with a number of other agents. And what you want to do is to mitigate your risks, to minimize them or eliminate them altogether. And when we're talking about arts, we're talking essentially about a consensus, because a lot of people are trying to press the artist to make his art safe so that it does not fall onto anyone, and it should have the appropriate color and so on and so forth. So it is this perpetual or eternal consensus, if you will, resulting in something very expensive but of very poor quality. And you can see some examples on my slides. When you actually take a closer look, when you actually make it a point to notice them, you will see that this is what they look like. I mean, they just are put up. People just put them up because they have to do so. They are legally obligated. This is what one of the architects actually erected, a statue of himself. A statue. Another example is about the chandelier. $5 million was spent on this, but it is now hanging from under Vancouver Bridge, and it just doesn't make any sense. And so the question is, can we really do something with it, something good? Put it to good use. This is an example from Solouid, an American artist. He's a great conceptualist. And so Saul Levitt proposed instructional art, this concept. So usually this means using some guidelines to create pieces of arts. Sol is no longer with us, but this concept is still in use. This here used to be an abandoned premises. It was like a blind wall. No one could do anything with. And so they wanted to put up a sculpture. But even if you have this, when you have this great developer and a great artist and everything is done professionally and you invest tons of money, still the outcome is really, could really be useless. This is not applicable. So another question is, can we do something with it? Something practicable? And the answer is yes, of course. You can. Because I know cases when the developers would invest not into objects, but into spaces rather. Architects will recognize this skyscraper and the space near it. And urbanists will as well. This is like the greatest example of how the developer uses half of the land, half of the plot, and gives the other half to the community as a public space. And you're all aware of the architecture. Here you can see the architect and the other architect who designed the restaurant. But there's also Phyllis Lambert in the picture. She was representing the developer, and it was her who actually found the architect for this project, and she thought of a cultural program to be implemented as part of this site. And she was actually supervising this live art project for a few years. It was a changing object. It was a live object. It wasn't a statue they invested in. It was the performances and the installations. And I believe this approach to be quite healthy because it helps you deal with this issue, make the investment, invest wiser. And let me also tell you about this stage pilot in Dnipro that was a pilot, a crowdsourcing pilot. And here on this screen, you see another example from Oakland. At some point, I asked my colleague about what he thought about having this site, using it as an art residence instead of building a sculpture or a statue. And so here's the outcome. The space is now more lively and much more interesting as opposed to just having some sort of a sculpture there. This is my final slide. And this space that you can see on this picture seems really plain and meaningless, but it turned into this great site and a great object. So what I'm trying to say is that creative space is important and arts is important, and we should do that and we should support the arts, but let us not confuse this life culture that brings life and meaning with an object or a sculpture just as contributing to the visual value. And I will always be the advocate of the former because I believe that it gives us much more value than the mere object. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kuba. Your presentation was worth it, was worth the wait. And I have some great news. We're breaking for 15 minutes and we will resume at 3 p.m. So feel free to use this break to use the restroom, to maybe visit the second floor in our exhibition, or do something else that seems fun. So we will resume at 3. And if you would like to hear the Ukrainian interpretation, please grab a headset at the entrance. Thank you, and see you back at 3 and to talk about communications and advertising. See you.
У перекладачів немає звука.
ну, скажем так, дают им возможность понять, что вы – это вы, но с другой стороны, эти визуальные сигналы, они не могут меняться каждый год. Или там, вот часто, особенно компании, с приходом каждого нового маркетинг-директора, они проводят ребрендинги. И обычно этот ребрендинг заканчивается тем, что у продукта могут упасть очень сильно продажи. Почему? Потому что людям на самом деле не нужны бренды, они о них не думают. Вот эта вся история с лавмарками, да, она когда-то, ну, там, может быть, была актуальной, но уже она не так актуальна, как была как раньше, потому что появился интернет, и очень многие бренды могут там напрямую общаться со своими потребителями, и поэтому вы должны понимать, что ваш бренд это, во-первых, ну, на самом деле не такая уж важная для людей штука, она им нужна для того, чтобы, скажем так, проще было ориентироваться в реальности. Если помните, такой есть манифест рекламный 99 франков, если читали эту книгу или смотрели, там есть такой момент, когда мама, у которой там плачущие дети в коляске, она стоит в супермаркете перед полкой с йогуртом, и вот ее задача не найти тот йогурт, который она больше всего, чей бренд она больше всего любит, чью рекламу она любит смотреть или чью ее вдохновляет, а тот бренд, который она уже давала этим детям. Вот, и вот этот йогурт, если он меняет свою упаковку, он сразу же этой маме делает очень сложно. Почему? Потому что, опять-таки, это последние, скажем так, даже Нобелевскую премию в поведенческой экономике не так давно дали за вот это простое такое одно из открытий в том, что люди 95% решений принимают на автопилоте. Вы не задумываетесь, какой ключ из связки достать, чтобы открыть свою дверь, или с какой стороны у вас возле кровати стоят тапочки. И вот эти все решения происходят у вас на автомате. И если что-то здесь не так идет, то ваш автопилот начинает ломаться. Так вот, только 5% решений принимается так называемым, скажем, таким медленным мозгом, когда нам нужно подумать, когда нам нужно действительно там принять какое-то сложное решение. 95% решений мы принимаем на автопилоте. Так вот, задача брендинга, собственно, да, этого процесса, сделать так, чтобы человек вот мог этот автопилот свой использовать по полной программе, и чтобы он меньше всего думал о том, какие у этого бренда ценности и какой там у него манифест по жизни, а просто мог его узнать. И как это работает, очень тоже еще такой известный тест есть, особенно для дизайнеров. Нам всегда сложно смотреть на слово, которое написано, например, фиолетовым, но при этом orange, да, вот написано. И это означает, что каждый раз, когда мы видим вот такие вот ситуации, что нашему мозгу становится сложнее, и задача рекламы и всех коммуникаций сделать так, чтобы мозгу было проще. Поэтому, если представить условную полку в супермаркете, здесь есть два пути, скажем так. Путь, который когда-то создали, скажем так, основатели рекламы, заключался в том, что бренды должны были рассказывать какую-то свою длинную историю. Путь второй, который является другой крайней точкой, который когда-то придумал, скажем так, создал Байрон Шарп и свел бренды, собственно, к узнаванию. То есть если есть логотип, цвет и стиль, то этого достаточно. Мы в Федере считаем, что где-то посредине, правда, что бренды не должны усложнять, они должны просто сказать человеку, что я тут твой любимый творожок, который ты любишь, вот он я, и я не прячусь. И в этом связи последний слайд, который у меня будет в этой презентации, знаю, что уже все, да? Да, вот есть знаменитый кейс того, когда дизайнеры хотели перехитрить человеческий мозг и решили, что тренды в дизайне это важнее, чем то, как люди на самом деле принимают решения. Это такой хрестоматийный кейс сока Тропикана. Этот сок имел 85% доли рынка США в апельсиновых соках и прекрасно себя чувствовал вот с такой, да, достаточно олдовой упаковкой. Потом, как бы, эта компания обратилась к очень модным дизайнерам, которые сказали, что нам, конечно же, нужно освежить этот бренд. Они сделали достаточно трендовую такую модную упаковку. Продажи очень сильно упали в первый же месяц. Через полгода компания вынуждена была вернуться к своей старой упаковке, но свою долю рынка она как бы утратила. Это означает что не пытайтесь быть слишком сложными, сделайте просто своему потребителю, и все у вас получится. Спасибо.
Дякую. Дякую, Валентине. У нас зараз з вами ще будуть в цьому блоці два наступних спікер та спікерка. Якщо у вас є питання до Валентина або ви захочете задати, то це можна буде зробити трошки пізніше, як і всім спікерам разом. Можете подумати. Коротке нагадування, що у нас там на другому поверсі є простор, в якому відбуваються воркшопи, а також простір, в якому можна познайомитися з креативними підприємствами. Тому використовуйте там цей час фестивалю теж, щоб зайти туди Зараз я рада вітати вже на сцені Христину Ільїну. Христина працює з Radioactive Film, працювала. Це відеопродакшн, який виробляв кліпи для відомих гуртів. Христина розкаже трошки внутряків, як це виглядає, які процеси зараз в Україні та в Європі. Вітаємо Христину.
Всім привіт, доброго дня. Зараз я буду підключати просто комп, так що секундочку, будь ласка. І потім ми поговоримо на прикладі вже створеного відеоролику про всю історію. Вкратці. 15 хвилинок не так багато. Подожди, это HDMI?
Да, таке. Да. Поки ми підключаємось, коротке нагадування ще раз, що можна буде всім спікерам задати питання, але в кінці і всім трьом. І там часу не так багато, тому хто перший, знову ж таки, підійме руки, той встигне задати питання. Після цього, після Христини, у нас ще буде Guido Mobius з Німеччини, який займається продюсуванням експериментальної музики. Це такий дуже короткий анонс наступного спікера. І просимо включити комп'ютер вже техніків.
Сейчас я проверю этот. Сейчас я подождите, мне надо проверить интернет. Секунду. Так, всім привіт, доброго дня. Давайте сьогодні проговоримо трошечки про продакшн в Україні. Це насамперед, незважаючи на те, що в нас в Україні дуже багато знімалося кіно, вже давно це всім відомо, але саме комерційний продакшн, тобто зйомка комерційних відеороликів, це досить нова в нас історія, і тому наш ринок тільки розвивається. Всі, хто хочуть і можуть до нього долучатися, будь ласка, welcome завжди. Нові креативні люди всюди потрібні. Дивіться, давайте зараз ми почнемо з того, що я вам покажу один з моїх улюблених роликів, який знімався там роки 3 назад, але він був, чому він важливий? Він був досить сильним поштовхом, як комерційний проект, але він мав дуже важливе соціальне підґрунтя. І давайте подивимось просто, і потім поговоримо про процеси, як це все проходило, трошечки про команду, трошки про склад адміністративної групи, хто чим займається, як в нас розподіляються всі повноваження і все таке інше. Зараз, секунду, вмикаємо ми VLC-шку і дивимося.
What do you call a girl on her period? Call her next week.
I filled out a tag, and it was like I had my own hall pass.
Тепер давайте все спочатку. Що ми робимо в продакшені? До нас приходить трітмент режисера. Це звичайний документ, розгорнутий бриф, який вміщає в себе інформацію для всіх департаментів, де ми можемо ознайомитися з нею і потім розподілити всю цю інформацію. Зараз я вам покажу приклад трітменту, який був до цього проєкту. Зараз ми його запустимо і подивимось всі разом. І так, режисер робить такий візуальний, дуже цікавий свій погляд на той процес, який він хоче візуалізувати і показати потім глядачу. Спочатку викладається ідея, то, на чому ґрунтується його підхід. Ну, це має ще таку продажну трошечки сферу в собі, щоб клієнт просто це купив. І режисер міг мати змогу знімати цей проєкт. Тому він робить це гарно, візуалізовано, доступно для глядача, щоб всім було все зрозуміло і всі хотіли працювати над цим проєктом. Давайте я швиденько дуже буду прогортати цей трітмент. Ми просто подивимося, як це може виглядати і якою може бути презентація, щоб вона просто приковувала увагу як працівників продакшну, які потім будуть з нею працювати, так і клієнтів і агенцію, яким режисер, власне, продає цей продукт. Викладається своя ідея, викладається своє бачення, потім викладаються референси на локації, кастинг та всі візуальні ефекти, які потім режисер хоче застосувати у своєму доробку. І цей трітмент передається як робочий матеріал до продакшену. Що робить продакшн? Він бере цей документ і розбиває його на маленькі блоки. Насамперед, ось ми маємо лист з кастингом. Всі знають, що це дуже важливо. Актори – це 99% успіху нашого ролика. Кастинг-департамент бере цей бриф і робить підборку акторів. Потім локейшн-департамент робить підборку локацій. І потім вже, коли в нас є якийсь базовий підбір всіх матеріалів, ми робимо деякий селект з цього, і потім все це відвідується режисером та оператором, і, в принципі, це є базис для знімального процесу. Дуже важливо, хочу сказати, що дуже важливо в цьому процесі все те, що між собою всі департаменти мають тісно вести комунікацію. Бо від локації і кастингу залежить, в принципі, те, як може змінюватися сценарій протягом всього відеопродакшену. От, в принципі, це трітмент дуже цікавий, бо він має якісь анімовані штуки, він має в собі ще й постпродакшн, деякі теми, які потім будуть застосовуватися у медіа для маркетингових всяких цілей. От, давайте поки що це я закриваю і відкриваю просто свій документ з слайдами простими, де ми подивимось на структуру. Секундочку. На структуру роботи продакшну адміністративної групи і всіх департаментів. Так. Опс. Дуже важливою частиною роботи є підбір команди, звичайно. Є адміністративна група. Це executive producer, це продюсер, line producer, та це продакшн менеджер, продакшн асистент та шаперони. Executive producer, він просто займається як супервайзингом всього процесу і просто наглядає за тим, щоб все йшло нормально і більш має комунікацію з клієнтами. Продюсер та лайн-продюсери, вони вже підбирають команду, саме вони наймають правильних людей, які мають правильно по поставленим цілям все організувати. Продакшн-менеджер займається більш технічним оснащенням майданчика і всіх підготовчих технічних процесів. Продакшн-асистенти займаються розміщенням людей і, в принципі, обслуговуванням додаткових якихось штук, оформленням презентацій, всі такі хатні, скажімо так, процеси. Шаперони – це просто додаткові люди, які у випадку, коли дуже велика група, вони дають додатковий комфорт і допомагають в якихось дрібних штуках. Принести каву і посадити в машинку, щоб ніхто ніде не загубився і все таке інше. Так, наступна група основна. Це, звичайно, режисер, це оператор, це другий режисер, це продакшн-дизайнер, він же художник-постановник, локейшн-менеджер, кастинг. І потім вже в нас є мейкап, вардроб, вони ж називаються beauty team. І є ще технічна група. Це гафер, це шеф команди, який займається освітленням на майданчику, і камерний департамент. Дивіться, що ми можемо сказати про цю всю структуру. Директор, як на мою думку, це є бос, в принципі, всього знімального процесу. Це його ідея і завдання всього продакшену зробити так, щоб допомогти режисерові втілити цю штуку в життя. Є оператор, він відповідає, звичайно, за візуал, і в дуже тісній колаборації з режисером та продакшн-дизайнером вони, в принципі, це три найважливіші кіти в продакшені, які роблять всю креативну штуку. А потім First AD, він же другий режисер, це людина, яка займається плануванням знімального процесу. Тобто, коли у вас є вже всі вводні, всі локації, все домовлено, всі актори, завдання другого режисеру спланувати весь знімальний процес, щоб він пройшов найбільш оптимальним чином, в найбільш короткі строки, і щоб всі кадри було знято, звичайно, і щоб всі були просто довольні і щасливі. Так, локейшн-менеджер, це зрозуміло, це підбір локацій по брифу, домовленості з локаціями, з поліціями, з державними установами, всіма тими людьми, які пов'язані з місцями зйомок. Кастинг-департамент, підбір акторів, звичайно. У всій цій структурі дуже важливо, щоб комунікація між всіма департаментами постійно оновлювалася, бо якщо навіть, наприклад, вардроб-департамент не бачив фотографії локацій, на яких буде зніматися відеоролик, то це все одно може вплинути на кінцеву якість і на те, що кінцевий результат не буде таким, як міг би бути в найкращому випадку. Так, що я вам хочу ще розказати про ці штуки. В принципі, дуже круто, що зараз в Україні в нас ще більше і більше кожного року приїжджає імпортних партнерів, і всім дуже подобається з нами працювати. Це дуже круто, я вважаю, бо в нас дуже професійна, класна селекція робітників, в нас хороший технічний стан нашого ринку, і дуже приваблює людей бути в нас, бо ми френдлі, flexible і готові завжди допомогти, це правда. І питання знімального процесу в нас вирішується все ще таким досить лояльним чином, і всюди можна домовитися, всім посміхнутися, сказати якесь добре словечко, і всі двері тобі будуть відкриватися. Тому дуже круто, що зараз в нас приплив імпортних робіт дуже високий. І ми на дуже високому рівні, порівняно там з Румунією, Болгарією, в плані професійному. Важливо ще, друзі, цей останній, я не знаю, смішний слайд чи ні, як на мене, то досить смішний. Він говорить про те, що кожен на робочому місці, в продакшені і, в принципі, будь-де має бути на своєму місці. Продюсер сів за кермо вардроп-трака чи якогось там трака і просто трак в озері. Тому, любі друзі, давайте просто будемо поважати всередині свого колективу, бо це дуже важливо, всі свої завдання, не будемо лізти носиком у інші справи. І так працює, в принципі, і продакшн. Бо якщо освітлювач буде займатися вардробом, а гример буде займатися звуком, нічого гарного з цього не вийде. Я не знаю, що там за таймінгом.
Так, у нас якраз чудовий таймінг, ідеальний. Дякую, Христино.
Дякую вам дуже за те, що послухали мій 50-50 цікавий розказ про інсайд роботи. Гарного дня всім. Цьомки.
Цьомки, гарного дня. Але Христина сюди ще повернеться. Насправді, за 15-20 хвилин у нас вже будуть питання-відповіді. Валентин повернеться і Христина повернеться. Тому, якщо у вас вже є запитання, ви їх занотуйте, будь ласка, і не забудьте їх задати. Так, зараз у нас такий коротка переробка сцени. А я поки розкажу вам, хто буде з нами говорити.